Guys, welcome. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time on such a busy day in news. So certainly going to make the most of this time that we have together. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all gathered today. From where I'm situated, that is Gadigal and Wongal country, part of the Aurora Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, before we get started, I wanted to touch on an audience challenge that many of you guys are facing today, and that is the inability to post on Facebook. Over the next hour, we're going to show you how to identify where traffic is coming from, which allows you to identify any changes. This also allows you to identify the impact of changes like this one. And more important than that, it shows the areas that you could target for growth. So let's get right into that. So just as a bit of background, I work as part of the Google News Initiative, which is shortened to G&I. It's Google's effort to build a stronger future for journalism. My role focuses on the first of the 3 E's, which is to elevate and strengthen quality journalism. The other areas of focus for the G&I are evolving business models through programs such as Subscribe with Google, and also empowering news organisations through tech innovation. That is mainly achieved through the development of tools for journalists, some of which we'll go through today, but there are new things coming all the time. So we're really committed to keeping you guys up to date, and there will be a link at the end as well so that you can sign up for our newsletter. In order to help journalists stay up to date, we have a website as well, which allows you to do training on demand. It's up on the screen right now, g.co/news training. This site allows you to learn at your own pace and to learn about all of the different elements of digital journalism, from finding to verifying and visualizing stories on the web. We also have a teaching fellow who can take you through the basics of a video conference. Former AAP editorial trainer Miguel de Souza is training this right now and is also moderating this session today. So let us know if we can put you directly in touch. And Miguel, maybe give everybody a little wave so that they can see you, say hello.
Hey folks, I'm just helping somebody get on to this, and I certainly would, maybe I'll come back a little bit later on and Neil will give me a chance to tell you about some of the stuff we're doing, and then hopefully in a couple of seconds I'll have Jane from the ABC on to join you as well, so I'll talk to you guys later.
Amazing, mate, thank you so much. Okay, so there's a massive photo of me. My role at Google is quite unique. It's a 12-month fellowship with a very clear goal. My role is to help local, regional, and small publishers build stronger businesses through both training and support. I got my first experience in journalism at a local newspaper, the Lithgow Mercury, aged 15, and the first 2 years of my career was spent serving local communities as a reporter. I'm just honestly so thrilled to be able to be in this role at this particular moment in local news. I most recently led News Corp's shift to digital by building a national training program for newsrooms. I trained over 1,000 journalists in social media, search, and mobile video. I also taught journalists and editors how to maximize readership and revenue. Previous to that, I launched a social news startup called Storiful in Australia. Storiful was a first of its kind service providing publishers and brands with social media to use in their storytelling. I was also head of social media at the ABC, leading the business through a period of fairly dramatic change. And I'm currently a sessional lecturer at UTS. I also have a cattle farm in country New South Wales and a 13-month-old daughter named Molly. But don't get me started on either of those things or we won't have time for anything else. Just before we proceed, there is a new Q&A feature inside Google Meet where you can ask questions. So please do that as we go, and I'll grab from there. You can also upvote your favorites, and I'll make sure that I get to those either throughout the session or right at the end, where we'll have plenty of time to chat about this and also anything else you want to talk about. You'll also get access to this recording and the slides after the session, and a short survey will hit your inbox as well. We really love your feedback. It basically allows us to continue to get better and also to make the case for this kind of work inside Google, which is not that hard to do, to be honest. All right, so let's get into the audience strategy bit. So one of the fundamental differences between print and digital publishing is the deeper understanding of who your audience is in digital and how they behave. So imagine that you could stand over the shoulder, you know, you're working for a newspaper, you could stand over the shoulder of your readers as they flip through the paper, watching how much time they spend on every page, on every story, on every picture, on every ad. Analytics allows you to do that on the web. And we're going to show you how to do all of this today. What this means for you as a journalist or a publisher, or some people here are from product and sales, it allows you to use this data to create more engaging stories, build better digital products, and also tell more compelling stories to advertisers, really important one, to make them spend more money with you. So that's the goal here, is to build a better business through data, and this starts and ends with the audience. I should also say here as well, if you're in a different kind of business that's not necessarily a news business, you know, when I say audience, just think client, you know, user, whatever it is that, you know, it's all the same. It's all very much the same. This is not the Fonz from Happy Days. He looks a little like that. This is Justin, who is the Director of Education at Google. When I first started at Storeful, we had one goal, which was to increase the number of journalists using our newswire.
Hey, Neil, are you supposed to be showing some slides? I can't see anything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Sorry, guys. You didn't miss anything. Tell you what, Miguel D'Souza, very stern email to the product team on that one.
Sorry, I was...
Oh, no, not your fault. I was just sort of saying that's a very unusual thing. Can you guys see that now? You can see the slides? Okay. Everyone can see the fonts?
Yep.
Beautiful. My apologies. Not sure what happened there. Okay. So, here we go. So this is Justin. He's the Director of Education at Google. And he's an absolute data nerd. And so Justin basically looks at analytics like this. The one goal of web analytics is to increase our business outcomes. And I think one goal is a really powerful way to think about how to grow audience as well. So when I was first starting out at Storeful, we had one staff member, which was me, and we had one goal, and that was to increase the number of journalists using our newswire. We thought that if I could increase the number of users that were using our newswire service, that would deepen the engagement with our business, and success would flow from there. And it did. So we were able to double the amount of Australian users in the first 90 days, which started a process that led to us posting $1 million in revenue in our first year. So that's kind of the power of the single focus of one goal. Before we go any further, and now that you can actually see the screen, I want you all to write down one goal or one target for your publication or for you over the next 12 months. Don't necessarily need to think about it from your patch. You could look at the business as a whole. It has to be one goal. It has to be able to be measured. Go ahead and do that right now if you can. You hear the furious scribbling going on. So Justin goes on to say, web analytics help us understand our audience and their needs. and they also help us to make better online experiences for them. Now, depending on what you all wrote down, that might mean that we want to drive more subscriptions, and analytics will enable us to focus on what will make them subscribe. This is increasingly where publishers are going, and there's a lot of research to support, an increased willingness for people to pay. I can also send through some research that was done by University of Canberra and Google last year, which focused specifically on local news and regional news, and it did surface that amazing stat, which is that there is an increased willingness to pay, particularly in local, which is an amazing thing to know. Getting people to subscribe is a little bit harder than getting them just to click. As soon as there's a decision that requires people to hand over cash, it's a whole different ballgame. So we need to be really attuned to where they see value in what you do. And we will talk a little bit more about that as we move through. This will not be the only animated GIF that I show you today, but it is probably the most annoying. So get that one out of the way up front. Let's dive into some of the tools right now. So I'm going to focus on GA, Google Analytics, which is for two reasons. It's free, and I always have a bias towards free tools, and I also have a bias towards people that help me pay my mortgage. So I will talk a lot about Google Analytics today, but it is worth noting that this stuff applies to all analytics platforms. Most of the analytics platforms that you're using will capture this data. So it is something that will be applicable if you're using an in-house analytics system, or you're using a number of other free analytics systems or paid analytics systems that are out there. So let's take a completely random example. Let's say that you own a e-commerce store and you want to see how many users visit your website. With Google Analytics, you can see the number of visitors to your online store. You can see where they're coming from, which device they're using, and much more. So this is a typical view of the analytics dashboard. You can see your total sessions. You can see how many pages per session. You can see how many of these were new sessions, average session duration, so how long they stayed on average, and the total number of users and page views. You can also see how many of these were new users versus returning users. New users are really important, but certainly from my time at News Corp, returning visitors were seen to be our most valuable. We found that they stayed longer on average on our websites, just something you want to do, and they were more likely to engage with other products and services as well. So what that means basically is that if a user is returning to us more often throughout a 30-day period, they're more likely to spend 20 minutes on our website versus maybe 30 seconds if they were coming in from another source. I was going to say a particular source, but we're not going to talk about that today. And they were more likely to do something else with us as well. They were more likely to go across to realestate.com.au and check out a listing. They were more likely to go through to news.com.au or a number of other things that they might do with us. So really focused on making sure that those returning visitors were well served, and we paid a lot of attention to that. It's also a cost thing. It's a lot cheaper to maintain a customer than it is to attract a new one. So that's worth thinking about as well. Before we probably pause for a couple of questions, I wanted to talk about the much demonized bounce rate. It's worth clarifying. It's the percentage of single session visits for those that haven't come across it before. It's not necessarily a bad thing, bounce rate. It could flag a few things for you. It might mean that they were able to find what they needed right away, which is a good thing. Or it could mean that there's, other issues with your website. But generally, it's something that can be interpreted a number of ways. So important not to always see bounce rate as a bad thing. Also, at this point, worth mentioning that there has been a lot of terms thrown at you already. I will send through a glossary at the end of this that includes every single term that I've mentioned. I will send through every single slide as well, so that you have this as a resource. And you'll also have my email as well. So if you have any questions, send them through to me. And if I don't have the answer, I will find it or connect you with somebody else in Google that can answer that question for you. Speaking of questions, Miguel de Souza, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we actually do. Neil Franklin has asked, is the bounce rate often reflecting that a user is on private mode?
Oh, that's a good question. No, it doesn't. So, different things. So bounce rate bounce rate basically says that they came into your website and they left by the same door. Effectively, they didn't go to another web page for you. So. Yeah, so to make that even clearer, because I did a terrible job of explaining how that works. So basically how analytics work, or Google Analytics in particular works, is that it records as they come in to the website, but if they don't take another action, so they don't click through to another page, it doesn't know any more about them. So that's why they call it bounce. So they basically just bounce back out. We don't know where they came from, anything more about them. So it's a single session visit, a single page visit. Incognito, it will capture their I think it will. Miguel, that's a bloody good question actually around incognito mode. I was going to say that I felt like because it's anonymous, all the data is anonymized, that it would capture that anyway, but I don't think it can. Not if you're in incognito mode. Mr. Franklin, let me take that question on notice, as they say in Senate estimates, and I will get back to you with the answer. And I will get back to all of you with the answer as well. So I'll just have a chat with the team at Google Chrome and get an answer to that question, which should answer any sort of incognito mode. Great question, mate. Thank you for that. I hope I went partway to answering that for you. Miguel, any other questions there before we move on?
No, nothing at the moment, but I'll certainly record them if anybody sends them through. So if you do post a question in there or put up your hand, we will definitely get to you.
Thanks, mate. Okay, here's old Peter Twobeard. GA can also tell you more specific things about your users. As I mentioned, this is our friend Peter. You won't know his name, but you can tell what device he used to access your website. You can also see what he clicked on to come to your site. So, for instance, he came from Google search, or he came from a newsletter, or he came by direct message. As I mentioned, analytics won't give you personally identifiable information. You can't learn who is coming to your site, so you won't know specifically who Peter is, but you can get aggregated information that is anonymous, like demographics, age, location, all of that stuff is available to you, which is kind of mind-blowing. I'm going to talk to Jane if she has Jane been able to jump in, Miguel?
Yes, I believe Jane has joined us on her phone.
Great. Well, I'm going to ask Jane in a second about how they
might have to hit that mute button, sorry.
That's right. Look, I will call on Jane in a second about how they use analytics at the ABC. But one example from the time that I was there was we didn't have mobile optimized pages on our website, and we're trying to work out how to optimize the rollout of those pages. So how to do it in the most efficient way. So we looked at our analytics platform, and we realized that 30% of visits to the news pages were from mobile, which was the highest, pretty much the highest across the business, other than Triple J, which was somewhere hovering around almost 50% at that time, which was globally a very high figure for mobile at that point. So what we're able to do is basically say, well, ABC News has the largest audience on mobile. Let's roll out changes to ABC News first so that they are getting a better experience. So we're serving that loyal customer that's basically walking through fire to get to our pages at this point, and serving the largest audience that we have. It really allowed us to simplify our work schedule as we started to roll out changes across, I don't even know at that point in time, maybe 160 pages, the different sites. Sorry, it was crazy. It's a crazy big place. Jane, are you there? Are you able to talk?
Neil, I can see her. I think she just needs to unmute. Jane, can you, if you can hear me, if you can hit the unmute button on your phone. Sorry. I'll tell you when we can see it go off.
Oh, I think I can see you. Hello, Jane.
Still on mute, sorry.
Okay.
There you are.
Speaking of walking through fire, Jane has been walking through fire to join us for this session today. Mate, thank you so much for persisting.
That's okay. That's okay. Sorry, it's like everything is so tiny on this screen. It's really hard to work. But anyway, we got there.
Amazing. Mate, just wanted to talk to you in your role. So might be worth just starting by telling people what you do at the ABC up there in Brisbane, and also how you're using analytics in your day-to-day.
Yeah, so my role involves both search and audience engagement. So the idea that we're kind of like using both of those to work to inform our kind of commissioning and our daily output. And there's a few tools that we use, but I guess I think the thing that we know, and most people would know, is that the ones that are the easiest to use are the ones that get probably the most benefit, because if you try and bring in too complex tools, then people just don't have the time, in between the news cycle to actually sit down, look at the analytics, work out how that's going to impact their story. They want something that they, bang, get a quick answer. I'd say Chartbeat and Google Trends are two of those that we use daily and that a lot of people are doing. So it might be that we're using Chartbeat to identify, what's got the most eyeballs on it, so that you can then make sure that they're fully optimized for search. So the eyeballs might be coming through direct traffic. So then you want to make sure that it's got all the right search info so that you can then push that out to a wider audience. And with Google Trends, that might be just working out, okay, so what are the hot topics of the day, and what are the kind of questions around those topics that people want the answers to, that we could then start to dig into to provide complementary content to the main news stories of the day. So I've kind of like kept it surface level then, because there is obviously such a lot you can do with both of those tools, but that could be an example of how you might be able to introduce it into your newsroom just on a daily basis with the workflows.
Incredibly helpful. I do want to give people the opportunity to ask questions, but that was amazing. So you're kind of using two different tools. We're going to talk about a little bit about trends data a bit later in the session, but what Jane has basically said there is that you're using analytics to kind of measure the impact of your stories, and then potentially do more of the stuff that's getting impact, if I'm summarizing correctly, and also doing Google Trends, which is a tool that basically allows you to understand Google search traffic, so that Jane and the team at the ABC there are picking up stories that maybe haven't come through to them yet. So people are searching for, I imagine today, let's just have a punt, but I imagine people are you know, searching for things like, can I share news on Facebook? Just a, you know, simple. And that sort of stuff will be bubbling up using Google Trends. And there are also sort of weird and wonderful things, Miguel, isn't there, that you can kind of pick up from Google Trends. You know, in the US, they see spikes around spiced pumpkin latte, which is a big thing around Halloween, which can give a team, you know, the idea to, okay, let's pump out a spiced latte homemade version recipe that people can make at home, or you know, let's put together a list of the coffee shops in your area that home deliver during, you know, during lockdown. So, yeah. Have you heard any other cool uses of Google Trends, Miguel de Souza?
I actually read a fantastic story yesterday on a finance news website about how you can use, you know, what are they called? Rewards points to buy a Valentine's Day present. I thought it was one of the most ingenious and appealing ideas I'd come across on a website for a very long time.
I would have absolutely appreciated the heads up on Valentine's this year, because I actually took my wife and my little baby down to the local cafe, and he wished us a happy Valentine's Day, and I was like, well, obviously I took you guys to the best restaurant in town, so this is my gift to you both.
Well, these guys obviously, and this was on the CanStar website, they were obviously looking at their Google Trends leading up to Valentine's Day, and they were obviously, you know, their website's sort of theme is money and saving money and a lot of hip pocket sort of stuff, and so they married the two perfectly, and they even came up with a list of the presents you could buy using different point schemes. So like if you're on the Ponta scheme, you could buy these 6 presents, et cetera, et cetera. I thought it was cool. I was actually wondering, can I ask Jane a question?
Yeah, of course.
Because I'm really interested in sort of, you know, I've spent a lot of time working in newsrooms, not in any, thankfully, you know, for everybody out there, not in any position of authority or decision making. I was very much in the cheap seats. But I must admit, I've been fascinated over the years, because I've worked online since the mid-90s. I've always been fascinated over the years by that sweet spot. Are we all simply chasing, you know, what Neil's sort of doing? Are we all simply going to write pumpkin spice latte stories, people would ask? Or when does our news judgment come into it? And I guess for me, it wasn't a hard question to answer, because analytics, between you and me, analytics were just there to hopefully reinforce any point I was trying to make. But more importantly, on a practical level, I'm really interested in how you communicate those insights to your news editors and to people who are probably going, no, hang on, I want to follow this angle of the story, and you're telling me to do what? How does that happen? Can you talk us through? It's really interesting.
Yeah, well, I guess it's a lot of conversations and it's a lot of information sharing. I don't know how to put it, but I think before COVID, there was a lot of workflows where, like, you would be like, right, I'm going to write this story and this is how I'm going to approach it. Whereas now we're much more able to say, okay, that's great, but I'm going to tell you that people want to know the answer to this question. So if you use that in your headline and within your copy, and you answer that question, then you're going to get probably some traffic that comes in through search, and therefore that will impact your page views. So, you know, obviously page views is always a good driver and a good way of kind of getting people motivated. But once you can actually show the connection, which I think is really important to, okay, so this is what people want to know, and when we answer it, so, you know, all the kind of explainers that we've been doing around COVID on restrictions, you know, they're the ones that have really made big impacts, because it's listening to what the audience wants. And we've, like I said, we've combined that with actually our own audience questions project, and try to really be very in tune with answering the audience directly, rather than us trying to give the audience what we think they want to know. Is really being specific in the way that we produce our content. So I think it's just come through a very steep learning curve this year, and being able to actually you know, show those examples of, okay, so when we listened and when we produced this content, these were the results that we got. So, you know, an engagement has gone through the roof as well. So that has really shown us that, you know, people want to engage with our content. So it's not just the page views that we're looking for.
Yeah.
We also know, like through our live blogs, that we've kind of really developed a deep connection with the audience, and the questions that we get in through that are immense on a daily basis, and so they also kind of help shape what we're doing. But it really is, I think, just about that bit about not trying to give the audience what we think is important, which I think has been the premise for journalists for quite some time now. So it is a bit of a hard turnaround, but it's one that seems to be working for the audience and for us.
Yeah, certainly. I can see that during times when, you know, in a sense, a news story breaks and it's a big story, and obviously, you know, the best example I can think of is the terrible bushfires last year, and the ongoing sort of the nature of that clearly, obviously means. And you mentioned explainers. I used to, and this is the one name I'll drop. I used to work for a company called AAP, and explainers were our you know, bread and butter. And they evolved. It was funny actually, because when I first started at AAP, and this was quite late, you know, like the late 2000s, 2008, explainers were a 3-dot point thing called a fact box, which occurred at the bottom of a story. By the time I finished, they were a standalone story that often went out, and this is important on a wire agency, for any wire agency nerds that are here, that often went out on a subsidiary keyword to the main story, and often were the third thing that went out after the update to a breaking story. So, you know, they went from being an often overlooked adjunct to a story to actually being a standalone story in itself. And it seems to me that the combination of search and analytics, the invisible hand of search and analytics on what we were doing was that. So it was kind of interesting to hear you say that. I wonder how that translates for some of the smaller publishers that are here. I suppose I mean, it's still the same process, isn't it? Looking at those analytics and sort of seeing what stories to develop then out of that.
Yeah, I think you're right in saying that you know, and definitely just reinforce hopefully the decisions that we're and they do to a large extent, and quite often it's just we see the question and it's like, oh yeah, we've ticked that box, that's great, and we move on. I guess it's just the refinements that we're making now to make sure that we're being really specific when we need to be, and that we're covering off all the bases when we, you know, when perhaps in the past we wouldn't have been fully aware of the different kind of levels that people were interested in. It might have been the broader kind of explanation, whereas now we can really drill down and see exactly what people are after. But you're right, it's kind of like, it's just, you know, it's the same information, it's just tailoring it to the audience and really listening to them.
It's amazing. And when you think about like when I first started out, I started in a local newspaper, and the only audience feedback we would get was the handwritten letters that would occasionally arrive in the mail. Sometimes useful, sometimes not so useful. Jane, thank you so much for your insight there. Please, please stay on the call, and thank you for persisting to get through to join us today.
No worries. Thanks for having me here.
So it's a pleasure. And look, we will have a bit more time to talk at the end of this session as well. So don't fear, this won't be the only opportunity for us to have a chat. I did drop a message in the chat window before. Feel free to drop your questions in there, and either Miguel or I will pluck them out, or you can also just interrupt at any point, and happy to take questions as we go. So Google Analytics also gives you real-time information on when your users are visiting your site, which is really important also. You can look at things like time of day, days of the week, seasonality. So I mentioned Halloween before, but also Anzac Day, public holidays, Christmas Day. You could use the Christmas Day data, for example, to decide what rostering is required. you're one of those people in the newsroom that has to do the godless task of managing rosters, and I've certainly been one of those people, and have been one of those people that's had to do the Christmas Day shift too. So if you have no traffic after 2 p.m, you might roster your web editor to go home at 2 p.m. so that they can enjoy a late lunch with their family. Stick with me. This example is not as random as it sounds. This probably one of my favorite tools, I guess, or one of my favorite parts of analytics tools, as it allows you to understand how your audience is consuming your content across the day. This is the kind of data you can use to make decisions as to when you start stuff, when you roll over various parts of the website, and maybe when and how you promote stories. For example, if your audience rushes to your website first thing in the morning, a midnight rollover of yesterday's news just won't cut it. You might start a senior journalist on the first shift of the day with the web team at 5 a.m. So that your website is fresh and up to date by 6. This is something that has not been plucked from my mind. This is something that we actually did at News Corp. We did a small trial of this down at the Adelaide Advertiser, and we started a senior journalist, a chief of staff at 5 a.m. And we brought the web team forward from, I think they were starting at 8 or even 9, and we started those guys at 5 a.m. too. A deeply unpopular trial, let's just say, with journalists, but the data was irrefutable. So it caused a massive spike in audience data, obviously, which really gave them a huge kick in terms of their online presence, and also gave them a massive kick in terms of their print product as well. So newspapers probably going to bed at about 6 o'clock at night. Most of the journalists are getting in around 9:30, 9 o'clock, including the chief of staff. By having that senior journalist come in at 5 a.m, they were 4 to 5 hours ahead of where they would normally be, which was caused a much stronger paper towards the end of the day. So it's one of the examples that you can use that's a little bit outside of the box to make some other decisions in your workplace. You can also find out where they're coming from, where in the world they're coming from, that is. We were doing I don't know why I always think of this one first, but I do. We were doing a little pilot project with the Narendra Argus. It's a wonderful local newspaper. They had a small number of readers in Colombia. I'm not going to make any aspersions about what's happening in Narendra, but they had some Colombian readers. Probably a more lateral example is from 40 South, which is a publication based in Tasmania. There are probably more Tasmanians outside of Tassie than there are in. They're kind of, like the Greek diaspora. There are more Tasmanians outside of Tasmania than there are in there. So they were able to, by looking at where their audience is coming from all around the world, they were able to start thinking about how they could serve that enormous audience that was probably asleep when they were posting most of their content. So they're now starting to think about things like, do we do a weekly wrap for our expats? Is there a paid newsletter that we might launch for them? What are the different opportunities that we have now to serve this audience that we really didn't know about before? So as random as that started, hopefully that ended in a nice place, and they are starting to think through how they use that geographic data now. Too much coffee is not enough sleep. I'm conscious that this might already be information overload, so just a reminder that I will send through the video to this entire session. I will send through every slide. I will send through all my notes attached to that slide so that you can see the detail of this, and also that glossary as well, so that you can have a quick reference that you might like to print out that just basically has all of the terms and what they all mean. So this is the final thing that I will mention around numbers. GA basically allows you to answer all of these kinds of questions. It lets you answer what they click on, where they're coming from, what they are doing when they arrive, how long are they staying on your website, and where do they go next, which is something that a lot of people don't realize you can also find out through Google Analytics. Where is the next place they go? This is only the second animated GIF, I think, Miguel. This is a bit GIF light, this session.
Yeah.
There you go. Basically, this allows you to answer these kinds of questions and know your audience better. Which article thumbnails are generating the most clicks? What style of imagery resonates well with different demographics? So what images resonate with different ages and demographics? Which headlines will increase your click-through rates? All of this stuff is at your fingertips inside GA and other analytics platforms. So when I first started pulling this training together, I put a bit of a call out inside Google to ask if anybody else had any training resources that I could use around GA. I stumbled across this slide, which, believe it or not, was presented at some point. Again, Peter Twobeard saying, this organization has succeeded in targeting me as an archetypal visitor to their website. Hopefully no one has ever received an email that says that. So that's what they would say in tech jargon. This is what I would say in translation. These people understand me. And that's really what we're trying to do with analytics. We're really just trying to deeply understand a user and anticipate their needs. Whilst we've got the dictionary out, I thought it would be worth talking about the difference between data and insights. This might be really obvious to a bunch of you, but certainly something I had a bit of trouble getting my head around at the start when I first started working in roles where data was really, really important to what I was doing inside a business. I really think about it quite simply that data is just information. And the insight is how you can act on it. Absolutely scrambled that one. But information, data is information, and insight is how you can act on that information. So what you can do with that information. And we've all got those emails, I think, at some point from someone that's just got access to the analytics and is sending through these really long emails with all of this information, and you're just like, I don't really understand what this is and how I can use this. So what I always think about is the data is the information, and you also need to include the insights. So what can we do on this? So we're starting to see, maybe you're seeing a massive spike in lifestyle clicks from Google search. Should you start leaning into lifestyle content? Should you do more lifestyle content? Should you think about how else you can leverage search to drive traffic to other parts of your website? That's just a quick example of data versus insights. Okay, so we're going to get into some of those tools that Jane very helpfully foreshadowed at the start there. These are some next generation tools that have just become available in the last couple of months. A couple of them are also refresh tools that have been around for a little while. So Google has created these free news industry tools to basically help newsrooms and publishers make data-driven decisions, both on the business side and also on the editorial side. They have terrible names, Miguel, I think we could agree. News Consumer Insights and Real-Time Content Insights. They've both been quiet heroes in newsrooms for a while. They've been re-released in the last few months with a new resource, which is called the News Tagging Guide. So basically, in a nutshell, Consumer Insights gives publishers recommendations on how to grow reader engagement and also reader revenue. If you've got a paywall or a membership model, it will also allow you to have some insights and information around how to grow that. Super helpful. It also allows you to understand how your content is performing in real time, and also what topics are trending on the web so that you don't miss a story. So it's kind of bringing together both of those things that Jane was talking about earlier, which is understanding how content is performing on your website by using Google Analytics, and then also tapping into our Google Trends or our search data to understand what people are searching for across the web in the area that you're in. So you're probably not going to see a lot of spiced pumpkin lattes, let's just say in the lead up to Halloween, but you might see some other content related to that. So it's really just showing you what's happening with the content that you've already created and what are some of the opportunities, I think, for you as a publisher. News Consumer Insights also has a feature that I love that allows you to turn this data into a dashboard that displays on a screen in your newsroom, or as many of us are right now, in our homes. So you can basically turn that search data, so those moments that you might be missing, as well as what's happening in real time on your own platform, into a very beautiful visualization that makes it super easy to see at a glance exactly what's happening on your platform and off it. The news tagging guide is the new addition to the family. It's a diagnostic tool that allows you to identify the audience metrics that you might be missing. I'm going to take you through that in just a second. But I recommend that you play around with all of these tools. These three are designed to work together. However, I just wanted to quickly give you a look at News Consumer Insights, because it absolutely blew my mind. So it has this built-in decision engine that focuses on how to grow reader engagement and revenue, as I mentioned, as well as showing you how to capture that data better. So what that basically means is it's created with the goal of increasing your relationship with your readers and also making you money. That's kind of the goal of this tool. To use it, you just log into the platform, which you can get via that link, and I will send that round on the email as well, goo.gl/datatools. You just log in using your GA account, and it's all there. As I mentioned earlier, there are a bunch of other analytics platforms that are out there, and they're all good too. But this is some cool news tools that work really, really well with GA. So this is the news tagging guide. I want to get to a quick case study, and we will run out of time if not. And this is going to be a great opportunity to bring in our good friends from Sunraysia Daily, because this is some work that we did with them. But this is the news tagging guide. This is what it looks like. If you do have Google Analytics, you can just log in, and it will show you exactly. It will give you a copy and paste version of the tags that you should be dropping into your websites, and exactly how to do that. It does require a little bit of sort of tech savvy, I guess. So if you don't have that in your publication, that's okay. Feel free to email me, and if there's a question that we can answer very quickly with our product team, we're really happy to help you there. I can also put you in touch with the company that we work with on this next case study, who are a Google partner, and they can do all of this work for you if you've got a little bit of money to pay them to get that work done. But yeah, it's designed to be sort of plug and play, but that option is available to have help from us or help from someone like Data Runs Deep. Look, I'm gonna bring instead of speaking to this personally, I'm gonna actually bring the guys from the Sunraysia Daily in on this one. So we did a number of small pilots with a project called Project Kookaburra last year. It was sort of an amazing project that went across the country. We did this one as well with the guys from Sunraysia Daily, focused specifically on Google Analytics. Who wants to jump in from Sunraysia Daily and talk to us a little bit about this project?
Hi guys, I can start off, and Jamie, if he's on there, might be able to jump in and fill in some of the details. So we use Google Analytics to track the project Kookaburra. So we did a couple of projects within Project Kookaburra, and we used that to track our readers, how many views we had, and track the increase that we saw. We also used it with our newsletter. So we've done a morning newsletter with our headlines for a few years now, but with our new website and in conjunction with Project Kookaburra, we used Data Runs Deep to put in some tags for us. And that then showed us how the newsletter was faring. And also we added a tag that allowed us, people could just sign up for the newsletter rather than subscribing. So anybody who was a subscriber was receiving our newsletter in the morning, and that was quite, we have good numbers on that. But we then decided to add a tag that just allowed you to sign up for the newsletter through MailChimp. And so you didn't have to become a subscriber, you didn't have to give us any details except your email. And that was a great increase. We saw extra readers. We haven't quite got to the point where we're working out whether they're changing into subscribers. That's the sort of stuff that we haven't quite got our head around. We've got our head around, I think, the data and reading the data and having reports set up so that we can get data quickly. But we haven't actually got to the point where we're converting that into or using insights and getting a bit more from it.
Amazing. So Susie, the goal with that change was to, firstly, was it to drive more traffic on the website by allowing people to sign up for the free newsletter, and then hopefully by building a relationship with them, then they'll subscribe at some point? Was that the kind of the thinking?
That was, yes. So we did our centenary. One of the big projects we did was our centenary, and we went back through our archives and put up old stories, so 100 old stories, and we started those off as free stories, just to get the traffic going to that section. And then we changed it over to it was only for subscribers, which saw an increase. Not a drastic increase, but an increase in subscribers. So any increase is a good increase.
Amazing. I'm going to drop that. I'm going to drop a link in the chat now to the Centenary website, which is just a beautiful piece of work. Does anybody have any questions for Susie, or does anybody else from Sunraysia Daily want to jump in and add to that?
Yeah, so what we're trying to work out now is how to actually use the data, and we don't have anybody specific to do it, so it's a little bit difficult. Nobody has the time to concentrate just on working that out. So a bit of a heads up on how we can do that would be good.
Look, if anybody has, this feels like a good opportunity for me to plug my office hours, Susie. So I have a couple of 30-minute slots each week where you can have a confidential conversation about any problem that you might be having. So it might be that you're not quite sure how to convert a free newsletter subscriber into a paid subscriber, as Susie has right now, or maybe it's launching a newsletter in the first place, or maybe it's around diversified revenue. Any question that you might have. I've done about 32 hours, I think, of consultations now over the last sort of 6 months. So really, really happy to get into the weeds with you guys and have a sort of confidential chat about what's happening and provide hopefully some solutions to your problems.
Yeah, that'd be good, because there's a lot of information. We just need to work out, hone in on exactly what we need to concentrate on. It's very distracting.
It is. And that's the thing, right? I'm just going to just quickly drop in a booking link for anybody that does want to jump on that and book some time. And that can be the challenge, I think, when you're first, starting to capture all that information. It's just it's a fire hose of data, and it's really important that you capture as much as you can. But I think that's why these tools in particular have been developed. Is it's like, what do I need to know? What are the key things?
Yeah.
And so, news, consumer insights, and real-time content insights are kind of built to solve that problem. But it's bloody it's confusing.
Too much good information.
Yeah, exactly right. And I'll take it back to a farming example, because that's what I do. But I've had the farm now for 5 years, and I started taking soil samples at the beginning, and I had no idea what I was taking samples for. But now I'm sort of 5 years further along. I can read the data, and I can look back over 5 years of data, and I now kind of know what I'm looking for. So that's the key thing. It's just to make sure that you're set up really, really well. And it sounds like Data Run Deep have set you guys up well in terms of what they're capturing.
Yeah.
And then over time, you start to, unpack what it is that the data is starting to show you.
Yeah.
Susie, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and for offering up that insight there. So great to have you on the call. Thank you. Does anybody else, just before we wrap up, does anybody else have any other questions that they want to ask of me or Miguel or anybody else on the call? Excellent. Well, guys, that is pretty much it. I'm just going to step through a very quick recap. I will send this through. So these are the things that we've learned today. Audience is a central focus. Your success grows from how well you serve them. Analytics helps us to understand our audience and their needs, and this allows us to serve them better. Data is information. Insights is information that you can act on. And the final one there is just something from my personal experience, and that often there becomes somebody like Susie who becomes the expert on audience data or social media or something else within the business. And it's just really, really important now more so than ever that those voices are heard within your publications. So often at the ABC, I would be working with people that were in their early 20s. Sometimes it was their first job, and they would be the absolute best in the country at social media, but found it really difficult to tell directors and others that this is what we need to be doing. So if you're an expert in data, please share that data. Don't keep it to yourself, and allow people around you to understand what's happening with the audience, because it's really, really critical. And what Susie's done really cleverly there is also set up automated reports, which you can do through Google Analytics. We are a little bit over time. Final animated gift for the day, Tom Hanks. Great movie, big. You can email me at neilvarcoe@google.com. I'm also Neil Wrights on all social platforms. Feel free to hit me there. We do have that training website as well, which offers training on demand, g.co/newstraining. And please be in touch if this is useful for you. I'm really happy to do this session again for your newsroom. And as I mentioned, we've got the wonderful Miguel D'Souza there who can do verification and a few other things. Miguel, we might just get 30 seconds of power from you just on exactly what you can do.
Yes, that's right. If you do actually want some Google fundamentals training for your newsroom, and by newsroom, that can be a very, very small team of, 1 or 2 people, all the way through to dozens or hundreds. I cover search, some verification and reverse image search. I cover things like producing charts and graphics with Flourish, and also using mapping and satellite tools, all of which is really good stuff either for your website or also to help you promote stuff that's on your website. So thanks. Thanks, Neil.
Great, thank you. And thank you for everyone for joining today. Thank you, Neil Franklin, my friend down in the Kapiti Valley, for firstly putting out the fire this morning, secondly for joining us today. And to the rest of you, Jane, thank you for your time and your insights as well. Wonderful, Susie, thank you. And that is it from me. So I will send this through on email for you guys shortly, but that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining us.